In this video, you will see the simple construction and plans for a modular shade house designed to hold orchids, but it could be used for any plants that require some shade and/or for potted plants that you want off the ground. This is an ideal budget-friendly design that can be expanded or moved as needed. When I built this shade house, we were renting a house in Honolulu, Hawaii. I wanted to grow as many orchids as possible, but knew that I would need to relocate them at some point. As the collection grew, the shade house did as well. I hope you enjoy the video. First, let's start by looking at the space I had to work with. This was an uneven concrete patio area in the front of the house that was about 12 foot by 20 foot. I started by laying out some 2x4 boards to indicate the shape of the benches. I would start with just 3 4-foot by 8-foot benches as the actual shade house. Here's the basic design of the benches. They consist of 8-foot 2x4s, preferably pressure treated and painted. You could also use 4x4s or really whatever lumber you have. For each bench, the sides are constructed of 2 full 2x4s, then 5 4-foot 2x4s used for end caps and joists. They are connected with deck screws. You could use bolts, nails, or glue if you choose. The roof sections are almost identical, but don't require the center joist because they won't be supporting plants. Finally, each bench and roof piece is held up by a full 8-foot 2x4. Notice that there are small shelves attached where the benches rest. The bench height should be set to match your height and reach. Here are the partially completed benches set up in assembly line. As these designs show, the next stage is to attach galvanized wire fencing to each bench. I found this to be the ideal bench material. It allows maximum air circulation, it won't rot, and it's flexible and versatile. Shade cloth is added to each roof section. At this stage, assembly is simple. Just place each of the benches on the shelves and attach with deck screws or bolts. I think it's worth repeating at this stage that the correct height for you should be maximized. Before moving on, make sure that you can easily reach each shelf. If you can't, then adjust up or down and then move on. With all the parts constructed separately, the installation of the shade house goes very quickly. At this point, I just begin installing the roofing sections, as shown here. Now back to the original design for this shade house. The roofing was constructed by using just shade cloth on one side of the frame. An alternative is to add shade cloth to one side and the galvanized fencing material to the other. I highly recommend this alternative if you plan to grow orchids in hanging baskets, which I also suggest you do. This alternative design will dramatically expand your usable shade house space. At this stage, I was only adding 3 benches so I could do some finishing touches. I wrapped the perimeter in shade cloth. Not shown here, and what I would eventually do to this shade house and all future shade house builds is add galvanized fencing to the side. It's far easier to do it before adding the shade cloth. I also moved the fencing material and potted palm trees to the outside perimeter of the shade house for privacy and protection. My only recommendation here is to keep plants that are potted or in the ground at least 6 feet away from the shade house walls to keep your shade house plants segregated from soil-borne pests and issues. When you're renting a space or have other restrictions, it isn't necessarily easy or practical to keep plants away from your shade house. Notice the monstrous mango tree to the left. This tree was at least 6 feet away. Here I've reoriented the outer fence to move the palm trees as far from the shade house as possible while still offering protection. With this design, it's very easy to add or move benches. A few months after installation of the original 3, I had already outgrown them. Here I've added another bench. Here I've added another bench to the center. At this point I've added shade cloth to the center of the roof of the shade house, so a simpler bench was constructed and installed. If you have a small space and want to grow orchids or other potted plants, I suggest you give this design a try. You can modify it to fit your needs, your budget, and your climate. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing.